Happy Friday! Welcome to EdTech in the Bend. I'm Allison Schlofeld, and I'm part of the EdTech in the Bend team. We would first like to say thank you to South Bend Community Schools for helping sponsor our event. We also want you to join in all of our fun by introducing yourself and tell us where you're watching from in the chat on YouTube or Facebook Live. I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to introduce our kickoff this morning.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Modlin. I'm part of the EdTech in the Bend team. We're excited to welcome Michele Eaton to talk about blended learning today. So as you listen to Michele, don't forget to share using our hashtag ETITB20 on social media. And so now we'll turn it over to Michele.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Hi, thanks for having me. I am Michele Eaton, and I am excited to talk with you all about shifting from remote to blended learning and potentially back again, because who knows what this year will hold. There's my Twitter handle if you would like to tweet about anything that resonates with you or any questions you have. There's the hashtag. This is also based on some of the content from my new book, The Perfect Blend. Now, granted, I submitted the manuscript for this book before I knew what COVID was. And had I known this was coming, I probably would have written a couple of other chapters. But a lot of the ideas, the principles, and strategies come from the book, and that is the book hashtag as well. So just to get started, quick introduction of myself. I am the Director of Virtual and Blended Learning for the Metropolitan School District of Wayne Township in Indianapolis. So in that role, I get to oversee course development and staff learning for our online high school and our online and blended initiatives and programs K-12 around the district. Which has taken on a whole new meaning here in the last 6 months or so. So if there's my Twitter handle again, and if you'd like to email me, Michele@perfectblendbook.com is a great way to do that. But let's just jump right in. So regardless of the context in which you're finding yourself this fall, I'd love for you in the comments, if you know how you're returning to school this fall, let us know. Are you coming back remote? Is it going to be a hybrid situation where some days are face-to-face, some are online? Is it fully remote? Do you have an online option? And are you responsible for that online option? There are lots and lots of ways that many of us, even locally, are going back to school. But there are some key challenges that each of us face, regardless of that environment. First of all, we're going to have to be able to teach in person and online this school year. And for some of us, we have to do that concurrently. So I know I have several friends and teacher colleagues who are in districts where there is an online option, but that will be placed into their classroom, their face-to-face classroom. So they'll be responsible for teaching online and in person. For many of us, if we have a student that needs to quarantine after we are face-to-face, we'll be responsible for keeping learning going for that student. And then ultimately, whenever we do get face-to-face, we are going to have to provide ways for students to collaborate and connect with each other while social distancing or physically distancing. So we need to create opportunities for students to engage with each other, even if they're sitting at home. And even if you are starting back to school, our students aren't going to be able to get up and move around. They're not going to be working in small groups in the same ways that we're used to. They're not going to be sharing materials, and those present some very specific challenges. And then finally, we're going to need to be able to move between being remote, being hybrid, or being face-to-face pretty fluidly. I think we all probably can agree that the likelihood of us staying in the same type of teaching environment this fall will, throughout the whole year, is unlikely. We'll probably be having to move back and forth. So we want to be able to do that without causing too much disruption and to keep learning going. So I love seeing all of these comments. As you can see, there's so many different ways that we're all returning. But I do believe these are the three things that we're all going to face. And blended learning is going to be our best friend this year. We are facing the most challenging year of our careers, certainly. And with it, there are a lot of unknowns. There's probably a decent amount of extra work that we're all going to have to do. And this is scary and unknown. But if we structure our classrooms when we are face-to-face to be blended, and if we're really intentional about how we're designing our remote learning, we're going to be able to face those 3 challenges effectively and efficiently. And so to begin, let's first talk, what do I mean when I say blended learning? Really simply put, blended learning is any combination of more traditional face-to-face instruction and online learning. And so when we think about this, this school year, we can think about it on a spectrum. We might at times have our students face-to-face completely, but because of social distancing, we're going to have to rely on online learning to help students work through activities and collaborate, share. So we're not having to collect a bunch of papers and touch a bunch of materials. We're going to incorporate portions of online learning into our face-to-face instruction in our schoolhouse. There might be a time when we are both face-to-face and online, where you might have 2 days a week where students are face-to-face, and then you're providing some asynchronous online instruction at home. That would be a hybrid model of blended learning, but it's still that combination of online learning and face-to-face instruction. And then ultimately, this year might be blended. There are going to be times where we're going to be fully remote, and times of the year will be face-to-face. So we need to be able to move along this spectrum. We have an opportunity, though, to not just survive this year. We can create opportunities that are really high quality for our students in this blended environment. Like I said, I wrote this book before pre-COVID, and I wrote it because I feel really strongly about blended learning and the possibilities and opportunities that come along with it. So I hope that right now, I think it's perfectly acceptable to be both excited and absolutely terrified. And I feel myself wrestling with those feelings right now. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that feeling. There are a lot of unknowns as far as, and I want students to be safe, and I want to be safe. And I wish I could predict what the school year is going to look like. But at the same time, I'm really excited to learn some new things, to get rid of some practices that we've had in our classrooms that aren't effective, and to try something new and to build a new skill set that we can take with us even when we get back to whatever normal is. So let's first talk about 2 words that are getting thrown around a lot right now: synchronous and asynchronous. Just so that we're all on the same page. When I'm talking about synchronous learning, we're talking about live instruction. This is both face-to-face or online. If you are live with students, so you are teaching and they are present, whether that is physically in your classroom or in a Google Meet or in a Zoom room. That's your synchronous instruction. Think in sync. Asynchronous instruction, however, is student-based. And this asynchronous instruction can be happening in your face-to-face classroom when you give students maybe a digital lesson or a choice board to work through, and they're working through at their own pace. Or it could be happening at home, where you have a student working through a digital lesson at 9 a.m. and another student not working on it till 9 p.m. We are going to have to think really critically about both types of instruction, even if we're face-to-face, being really intentional about how we're using our synchronous time and how we're using asynchronous time. And this is because it's going to allow us to work efficiently. So if we think holistically about our classroom instruction this year, when I make a decision about what I'm going to do live in my physical classroom and what I'm going to give to them to work from their devices, to work through maybe at their own pace some digital learning activities, when I move remote or vice versa, if I think about what I did live in the classroom, that's now what I'm doing in my Google Meet, or that's what I'm doing in my Zoom room. And the digital lessons that I gave them, the learning activities that they were working through on their device, that now moves into the asynchronous time when they're working remotely. And if I structure my the way I'm thinking about instruction in that way, while there will be disruptions moving from one environment to the next, we can keep those instructional components the same. And so we can minimize the disruption. We can mitigate some of that so that we go home overnight, we find out one night we're going to be staying home remote. We can keep going business as usual because our students are used to working through that asynchronous content. They know what to expect in the live lessons. Okay, so we're going to talk about synchronous instruction and asynchronous instruction through the lens of interaction. And we're going to talk about this regardless of context. So whether you are starting face-to-face or starting remote or starting hybrid, we're going to think holistically. When I'm talking about synchronous instruction, my live instruction, I'm going to think about 3 types of interaction. Whether that means I'm standing in front of a class and they're working, and I have to think about how to do this while social distancing, or we're doing it in a Google Meet at home. There are 3 types of interaction that I like to frame any conversations around online and blended learning. And that is student to teacher interaction, student to student interaction, and student to content interaction. And while there are lots and lots of things to consider about online design, half of my book is about things to how to design digital lessons to be really effective. I personally think that if we just start with really thinking critically about creating those 3 types of interaction in our online and blended learning, we're going to immediately have some active, highly engaging experiences for our students. And I think this is one of those big hitters we can get a lot of benefit from. So let's start with thinking about the 3 types of interaction in our synchronous instruction, our live instruction. So let's start with student to teacher, how students interact with the teacher during live instruction. I think the student to teacher interaction is inherent in when we think about live instruction, but we want to make sure that it's not just directed from the teacher to the student, that we have some opportunity for back and forth. When we have to move or start into a remote environment, this is especially critical because webinars can be a really not very engaging experience for students. If we just prioritize the lecture during this time, then we're going to lose a lot of our kiddos. So keep that in mind. Also, if you are either remote or you're providing some form of live stream in your synchronous portion of your instruction to students, make sure that you're using your camera. I feel really strongly that we should not require students to use their cameras. That's a very vulnerable thing, especially if they're in their home environment. But your face in the learning, both synchronous and asynchronous, is absolutely critical. We're going to talk a little bit about teacher presence and how that impacts learning, engagement, and even academic integrity. But it's going to be important for you to use your camera. Even if you're having a bad hair day, we need to make sure students can see our face. I also think we need to think really critically about prioritizing small group instruction. When we move some of our content to a synchronous format, so if you are remote or hybrid and you have to be choosy about what we do live, we don't have a whole lot of time live with students. And so we need to kind of shift our thinking from all whole group instruction needs to be delivered live. I personally want to prioritize small group instruction. If I have a limited amount of time live with students, I want to use it to differentiate, to meet with small groups, to meet students where they are. We can do whole group instruction asynchronously. We can do that in a digital lesson and then pull data from that to see how students are doing, to make artful instructional decisions in our small groups, to really prioritize that. It's also a lot easier when you move remote. It's a lot easier to create these engaging live Google Meets or Zooms with a small group of students than if you're trying to manage 25 to 30 kids and making sure they're all actively engaged and not just turning their video off and going and playing Xbox. So this is really critical. I also think if you are working in a hybrid situation where some students are home, like 50% of your class is home, this can be really powerful because it's gonna be easiest for us to manage that kind of environment if we run our face-to-face classroom almost like we did our remote classroom. So if we provide a lot of that digital instruction and they just have a teacher that's available to help support that, we can use that time to meet individually with students to provide that more individualized support while students at home are still doing the same thing that students in the room are doing. So it's okay to kind of shift our thinking about what live instruction looks like, and really prioritize the smaller groups. There's also, and I'll tweet this out. I meant to share this link with the EdTech and the Ben team to tweet out, and I totally forgot. But a colleague of mine, Amanda Moore, she's Teach for the Win on Twitter. She talks a lot about how we can use slides for every student response techniques, getting all of our students into a Google slide and either having a card with their name on it where they move the card on the slide and they, instead of physically getting up and moving around the room, or every student has a slide and they're all contributing to the Google Slides during live instruction. Anything we can do to get every student responding is going to help, especially if they're sitting still and not moving around, or if we're in a Google Meet or a live instruction kind of setting. Things you can do to make sure that all students are actively engaging, even if it is we're all going to respond at the same time here. We're all going to take a slide. We're all going to answer this reflection question. The things we can do to ensure that students are actually attending to the instruction that's happening is really powerful. So Teach for the Win, that's her on Twitter. Shoot her a tweet. She has tons of Google Slides templates that I know she'd be willing to share. And I'm really sorry that I forgot to grab those before to throw in the chat. If anybody reaches out to me later, I can track those down for you as well. So thinking about that during your live instruction. I can see people are already doing this, but in the comments, wherever you're watching, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, share with others what are ways that you create opportunities for student to teacher interaction during synchronous live instruction. I know that you all have a wealth of information that should be shared as well. So keep that going in the comments while I keep it rolling. The next type of interaction to think about is student to student. So how do we get students engaging with each other during synchronous instruction? Some of those things that you were doing before, we absolutely still can do. You can have discussions, debates, Socratic seminars, and really prioritizing. If you go when you're remote, or if you have to go remote, thinking about prioritizing that synchronous time to get students talking to each other. This is really critical. And I think one of the most important types of interaction to think about when we are talking about online learning in any capacity, whether it's part of the physical classroom or in a remote situation, because online learning has a bad reputation for being kind of isolating. And if we don't design it intentionally to create opportunities for students to engage with each other, that's what it turns into. So we know learning is social, so we have to create lots of opportunities for students to engage with each other. So this can be done face-to-face, this can be done online, but it's really important to keep in mind. Also, providing opportunities for students to showcase their own learning or to teach. I love peer teaching and having students take on ownership of that. Teachers know when a student can, or anyone really, when you can teach something to someone else, that's when you know that you really know it. And we can create opportunities for students to do this, to take some ownership during that live instruction time too, whether that's whole group or in small groups. I also love back channels. So back channels are basically what you're participating in right now. If you are using the comment feature in Facebook or YouTube to talk with other attendees of this session, that's a back channel. And I love to do this with students. I did it with my second graders in the classroom. We would use either a discussion board. I used to use Today's Meet, which no longer exists and breaks my heart. But YoTeach is an app alternative to Today's Meet, where the teacher can create a moderated chat room that doesn't stay open forever, that students can use to have a conversation during live instruction. So you can do that. You can use Google Docs. I'm here to tell you, your kids are already using Google Docs as a way to have a back channel, maybe not about instruction. So we can help them learn how to use that for good as well. So if you have access to a Google document, you can have a running conversation during a live instruction. I also like, can you tell we're a Google district? But if you are a Google user, in Google Slides, when you go to present, one of the presenter view options is to turn on a Q&A. It's built into the system. It'll add a bar along the top that has a specific web address for students to go to, and they can type questions while you're presenting if you're using slides. And then you can push those questions to the screen, answer it, pull it back without losing your place in the slides. It's a really great back channel tool, and it's also monitored by you. So you can see who is posting what and only push it to the screen if you approve it. I'm loving to see all of these ideas coming through. The teacher moderated back channel, Yo Teach is what it was called. It's the closest equivalent to today's Meet if you've ever used that. Wonderful. All right, I'd love for you to keep sharing student-to-student interaction ideas during live instruction. How do you get students engaging with each other when you are in a Zoom room or a Google Meet? Or how do you plan on getting them to engage with each other during even a mini lesson or a lecture you're giving while the students have to sit at their seats facing forward? Keep those ideas coming in the comments. I'm loving seeing all of these. We obviously have a wealth of knowledge in this group right now. So great. The third type of interaction is student to content interaction, helping students engage actively with materials. And we can do this both synchronously and asynchronously. One of the first things we need to think about when our content during synchronous instruction is a lecture, we want to avoid the long lectures, especially if some of our students are looking at a screen during this time. Eye fatigue is real. The research tells us that we start to experience eye fatigue after about 20 minutes of looking at a screen. And when you start to experience eye fatigue, your ability to process information goes down as well. Now, good news, it's not 20 minutes total. Literally looking away and jotting something down on a piece of paper and then looking back kind of resets that 20-minute timer. So you can do instruction for long periods of time, but we just have to be aware if we're just lecturing and talking and they're just sitting here staring at the screen, that can start to contribute to eye fatigue. It also is not as engaging, and long lectures make it difficult for us to, when we're in a remote setting, know whether students are actually listening to us or not. So something to keep in mind, chunking things into smaller bits will help. Someone just shared the Edu protocols. This is something that's kind of new to me too, that I'm also diving into right now. And I think those will be really powerful, especially considering the challenges we're facing ahead. Something else, and you'll see this in both synchronous and asynchronous, but when we're doing live instruction, and especially if we happen to be doing this in a video conferencing platform, having multiple opportunities for students to stop and reflect is going to be really important. We're going to talk a little bit later about something called cognitive load, which is basically our ability to process information and move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. And reflection activities can really help with this. So anytime, especially we're thinking about looking at a screen, get students to stop, jot something down on paper. Just because we're doing things online does not mean everything has to be online. So I think that's important to remember too. It is perfectly okay for kids to get up at home and move around, or get a piece of paper out. Paper's not the enemy here. So being really cognizant of the stop and reflect activities. I think especially if we are face-to-face even and we're social distancing, I think about, like I said, I'm a former primary teacher. And one of the concerns I have, or the things that I can't wrap my head around is, how would I have kept 7-year-olds sitting in their seat all day facing forward? Kids have a lot of energy, and the reality is to keep them safe, we're not going to be able to let them move a whole lot away from their desk. And certainly there are things I think we should be doing, getting kids up and moving. But their attention span is going to suffer a little bit in this environment. And so the more we can get them to stop and actively think about what they're learning, that metacognitive piece will help them retain that information. You can also do this with polls. These are some of my favorite tools for polls that you can use, where students can, from their own device, participate in a Mentimeter, in a poll everywhere. Answer Garden is kind of similar. It just shows all of the answers in a word cloud. So thinking about even those quick tools, if you have students face-to-face, Plickers is great. They can get their own set. They're not sharing materials. Plickers allow them to physically hold up this little code to show, how they're feeling about the lesson, how they understand the lesson. It's a really cool tool as well. And then the last piece is that when we're thinking about our live instruction, we're going to have the most success when we directly tie that to what's happening asynchronously as well. What we don't want to do is have our online portion of the learning be like just this adaptive software that we have access to, or sending kids to Khan Academy where they're working through at their own pace. Those tools are great, but if we don't directly connect that to what's happening live or what's happening in small groups, we're not going to see as much academic gains as we would see if the work that's happening online and the work that's happening face-to-face or synchronously are directly connected. There's a lot of really interesting research around that. So that finishes up thinking about synchronous instruction through the 3 types of interaction. So go ahead and you know the drill now. So use those comments. Share how do you get students engaged with content. Something else I didn't share on here that I didn't think about. If using tools like Jamboard, interactive whiteboards online where students can physically engage with the whiteboard while you're teaching live is another great tool for synchronous instruction. I love these. I love seeing all of your ideas. Keep them coming. While you're doing that, we're going to shift into asynchronous instruction. So thinking about the digital lessons that we're going to give students that they're going to work through at their own pace. So a typical format of this is where you think about providing some video instruction or maybe some interactive lesson content, and then some activities that they're going to participate in, and they'll move through this lesson at their own pace. We can frame this within those 3 types of interaction as well. So let's start with student to teacher. Your presence in those digital lessons is absolutely paramount. Your social, emotional, cognitive presence, it impacts engagement, student engagement, it impacts learning, and it also impacts the likelihood students are to cheat in your online lessons. Really interesting research about this. So when I talk about your presence, that means everything from leaving feedback and participating in the discussions, replying to Flipgrids, and everything from that to sharing videos that have your face in them. Something as what seems insignificant, you creating a mediocre video with terrible lighting and where you're messing up your sentences and saying 12 times is almost always significantly better than using some overproduced video on YouTube. And that is because students need to see the teacher in the classroom. What we know about academic integrity, fascinating research. A lot of people think that cheating is rampant in online learning and that the environment causes more cheating to occur than what happens face-to-face. And the research tells us that's not true. It has everything to do with proximity. And this makes perfect sense in a face-to-face environment. I'm in a classroom right now, and if I were to give a learning activity to the students in this classroom and then come sit at my desk and check my email, they are more likely to cheat and copy off of each other than if I'm up walking around. My physical proximity to the learning impacts how much cheating is happening. Now, it's not a silver bullet. Students can still pass notes. They can still whisper to each other when my back is turned. I can't prevent cheating from happening, but I can minimize it. Now, online, that physical proximity obviously isn't there. However, your psychological proximity to the learning, how close you feel to the learning, if it's your face in the videos, if you are interacting with students, that impacts whether students are likely to cheat. When the teacher feels really removed from it, more cheating occurs. So again, no silver bullet, but it has a really positive impact. So something to consider. I already mentioned leaving feedback is really important. Jennifer Gonzalez, she's Cult of Pedagogy on Twitter, has a blog post about thinking about feedback, not as feedback, but feed forward, where you can, if you think about a big project where you leave the feedback at the end, This is problematic in a couple of ways. You as the teacher spend your entire weekend, right, leaving feedback on this big essay or this big project. And then when students get it, it's summative feedback. They can't really use it except on new assignments moving forward. However, if I break up those projects into phases and I leave feedback along the way, I'm still leaving the same amount of feedback. I'm just spreading it out so it's not all happening, one weekend of my life. And then if I have the final activity be putting it all together, using the feedback, making improvements, putting it all together, I don't need to give a lot of feedback at the end because I already gave them actionable feedback they could use. So a couple of things. It spreads out that feedback, doesn't give me more, doesn't give me less, it just spreads it out more evenly. And then students can use it, and I'm going to see better products at the end because they were able to use that feedback and improve their work along the way. So I thought this was a really great idea from her, and she has a great blog post about it. Keep those ideas coming. How do you create good student-to-teacher interaction in your digital lessons? And while you're sharing that in the comments, I'm going to move on to student-to-student interaction in your asynchronous lessons. One of the first things that is kind of the bread and butter of online learning are discussions. Most learning management systems will have a discussion tool. Even Google Classroom has one. You can pretty easily create them even in spreadsheets or a Google document or a collaborative document if you're using a different platform. Personally, though, I sometimes struggle with discussions, and I think they can be done well, but often I feel like they don't seem super authentic. Here's your prompt. Now go respond to 2 people. We've all had those discussion prompts, right? And while it's effective in getting compliant students go through, it almost feels like a checklist, like they're just getting through the activity. It's not a genuine dialogue. And so one thing that I found, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I like having dialogue in the comments feature of a collaborative document. So if I move a text into a document, and then I have students leave comments along the side and respond to comments, just from my own experience, I feel like those conversations have always felt a little bit more authentic and real than in the discussion format. So George says the same thing. I love that as an easy way, is using a tool you already know, that students already know, to have discussions. So we don't have to use the traditional discussion format. Exactly. You could use a Padlet as a way to have conversations too. Additionally, I like to think about having group notes or graphic organizers. So even if students aren't moving exactly at the same pace, having them contribute into a collaborative document and share notes together is really powerful. Like one that I've used before that I really like, I just create a document and I put a table in where they type their name. And then in the next column, it's they say, and the third column is I say. So maybe I have them watch a video, then they come into this document, claim a row, and find, what do they say? What's something that you heard in the video? And then what do you say about it? What's your reaction to it? Answering a reflection question. Using these kind of graphic organizers, group notes in those collaborative documents is a great way where students can benefit from hearing the thoughts, seeing the thoughts of others. They can comment on what their peers have posted, and you can do this in a collaborative way, even if you're not doing it at the same time. We've mentioned this already. Padlet, Flipgrid are 2 of my favorite tools to use for student-to-student interaction because I can use them in lots of different ways. Flipgrid, if you are looking for some new books, Kristen and Joe Merrill have a book on Flipgrid and the interactive classroom, and it is phenomenal. They're both classroom teachers, and they have tons of ideas for different ways to use Flipgrid. I am definitely a supporter of using limited tools and using them in lots of different ways. But we also have the reality of students get bored when every single teacher in their school is using Flipgrid. Their book is great because it gives you lots of creative ways to use the platform. I also think Flipgrid is really great for online learning because it creates a language-rich experience for students. Something else to look for in your digital lessons: how often are students speaking and how often are they listening? We want to avoid just simply a text-based experience. We need students engaging with language in meaningful ways, not just our English learners, but all of our students. And so Flipgrid is a free, easy tool where we can quickly and efficiently have students talking to each other, and you can talk to students. So I love those. What ideas do you all have? I see this question. Can you repeat who had the feed forward idea? That's Jennifer Gonzalez. She's Cult of Pedagogy on Twitter. So great question. Throw your ideas. How do you get students engaging with each other in an asynchronous digital lesson? Throw those ideas into the comments. Can't wait to see what you guys come up with. And while you do that, I'm going to move into the third kind of interaction, and that is student to content interaction. So how do we get students actively engaged with the materials we give them in a digital lesson? And this piece is critical, but probably I think maybe not the first thing we think about when we're designing online. If we're not careful, we can create kind of a passive experience for our students where they're just taking in material. And this is problematic for a couple of reasons, but there are ways that we can get them actively engaged with content. And this is going to help us as well with getting data about what they're thinking and where they are in their learning. So one of the first things we can do is just think about interactive content in general. Are we presenting students with content they're just consuming, or are they doing something with it? So simulations, games. If you are looking for some interactive content, I recommend these two places for free stuff. Everybody loves free, right? I've heard Matt Miller say that before, that a teacher's favorite price is free 99. So these are free. Guru is an OER tool, an openly licensed educational resource tool. And on their website, you can find digital content to give to students, and you can filter it by even if it's what kind of resource it is. Is it interactive? I can grab that. So I love Guru. I also have this URL here that I recommend jotting down, symbaloo.com/mix/OERS4. Maybe someone can throw it into the comments so that you all can see it. Symbaloo is a visual bookmarking tool, and my friend Kim Hendrick, she is Evolve with Kim on Twitter. She created this original mix of different OER tools to use when creating digital lessons. I remixed it and changed a few with my favorites, but she did the heavy lifting, so I want to give her a shout out. But this tool is great. I have it bookmarked, so when I'm creating digital lessons, I have a bunch of websites I can go to that are designed specifically for education. And this is important, I think. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but before I kind of created, used this mix and had this bookmarked on my desktop, I was guilty of just going straight to Google or Teachers Pay Teachers or Pinterest to find digital content. And I wasted a lot of time on Pinterest. I always tell this story, but I'd get on Pinterest looking for a piece of digital content, and I'd emerge 3 hours later with 12 ways to make a salad in a mason jar, and then like a bunch of ways to use shiplap that in my home. And then maybe a piece of digital content, but mostly just a little bit of self-loathing about how I've decorated my house. And that's not a good use of my time. And so these websites help me get straight to content curated for classrooms. I can get in, get out, and make the digital lesson. I also like to think about how I can make video interactive. We don't have to just give students a YouTube video. We can actually, by using tools like EdPuzzle or Playposit, which these are, they're freemium tools. So there's a free version and a paid version. I've been really happy with the free version. So I never recommend for people to spend unnecessary money. But what you can do is grab a YouTube video, throw it into EdPuzzle, and then you can add in pauses where you can record your own audio to give students something to think about. You can add in a question that students have to answer. And you can do this throughout the video. There are a couple of things really cool about this. One, there's an accountability feature. You can force students to not skip ahead. So you can actually make sure that they're watching the video. You can see, what they've watched, how many times they've watched each section. And then you can also pull data from the questions that they answer, and you can get some of that information back. And what I love about this, one of the things I often hear from teachers when it comes to online learning, and I heard from a lot of folks this past spring when we went remote, is that people missed that observational data they got from kids. That when you are teaching in a classroom, you can physically see a confused look on a student's face, or and know when you need to reteach something. And that's missing online. And that's one of those examples of, if we try to do things exactly the same way online that we do them face-to-face, it absolutely is missing. But by doing things like interactive videos, using these tools, we can pull that data from all of our students. We can get them thinking about their thinking, doing stop and reflect activities, helping them process that information, and then we can hear from all of our students, not just the ones that are physically showing a confused look on their face, about what they understand about what is happening. And so we can design in a way that actually improves the kind of information we get from kids, even if we're remote. So it doesn't have to be like that. So that's why I really love thinking about these kinds of student to content interactions in our digital lessons, because it's what makes the difference between being able to meet students' individual needs and not. Something else that I really like is thinking about active reading. There's a whole chapter in my book about the differences between how we read print text and how we read digital text, and tons of research on this. And just to give you a quick overview, a lot of the research isn't really great, just to be frank. We don't comprehend as well in digital text as we do print without some very specific changes made in the way that we engage with the digital text. When we get students actively engaging while reading, annotating, highlighting, we can disrupt that pattern of skimming and scanning that we do online. And then that closes that comprehension gap. It doesn't mean we can't comprehend in a digital format. It means if you hand students a piece of paper with text on it and you ask them to read that on a screen, and you give no sort of intervention or no sort of reading strategy while they're doing it, they're more likely to comprehend the print text. So when we have students engaging with digital text, having them actively engage is critical. And certainly you might be in a school or a district that has adopted fancy software that has cool annotation tools built in. And if you get access to that, use those tools. The reality is, though, for many of us, we don't have access to that. But we do have access to free tools that can do that. So one of my favorite strategies, I learned about this from Devin Hess. He works for UC Berkeley and focuses on digital text, is copying a text and putting it in a Google document. As soon as you do that, you have a free suite of annotation, highlighting, commenting tools. You can add text boxes to add in, stop and reflect activities throughout a text. You have all of those tools for free, and your students already know how to use them. Super powerful. And I love this because it does not take a lot of effort for the teacher. It's tools you most likely already know how to use. And then it means big academic impact for students. I love this one. I would love if one of my EdTech in the Bin friends who are backstage right now, if you could throw in the comments, I shared with you, I did some online PD in my district around active reading strategies using Google tools, Google Docs and Google Slides. I have that recording that if you are interested, you are more than welcome to view. There's also a document I'd like for them to share that's referenced in the video and has links to a lot of the research and some of the templates that are shared. So if you are interested in that, there are lots of different active reading strategies you can use using just Google tools. If you are a Microsoft user, I'm sure you can watch that and then just do a find and replace in your head of Microsoft over Google every time I mention it. But there's some resources for you if that might be helpful. And then I'd love for you to share your own ideas in the chat. How do you get students actively engaging with content so that it is an active experience and not just this passive consumption experience? Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about is something called cognitive load. And it has a big impact when we're talking about online learning in any capacity. So if you are creating digital lessons in your face-to-face environment, or you're doing it remotely, they're the same digital lessons. We have to think about cognitive load, which, like I said, is what our working memories can process. It's the effort being used by your working memory at any given time. So some cognitive load is good. It takes effort to learn new things, and that's good. However, at a certain point, when we max out cognitive load, our ability to process information decreases. And so it's our job as digital instructional designers to get rid of unnecessary cognitive load so that students don't max that out. Okay, a few things we can do when we're designing to help minimize cognitive load. First of all, consistency is really important. Consistency in navigation, in design, and everything from the colors you choose to the fonts you use. The more consistent we have each lesson, the less cognitive load is used to adjust to a new screen. One of the reasons we don't read necessarily as well in a digital format has to do with shifting of media, of backgrounds, and we go from one website to the next and it looks different, and that takes a certain amount of time and effort for our brain to readjust to how you navigate this page and adjusting to the layout. And so when our digital lessons are consistent, when you can create a teacher brand where one lesson navigates and looks and feels similar to the next one, when students open up that second lesson, they're not having to readjust to a brand new theme or a brand new navigation. They can get straight into the learning. So creating as much consistency as possible is important. Also, simplifying. I will always recommend that you choose a handful of tools and you stick to using those tools really well. Do not feel like you need to learn every tech tool under the sun. For me, I self-identify as someone that's pretty techy, and I like learning about the new tools. But when I'm designing an online lesson, I use the same few things. I use every tool within my learning management system I can. If I can do it in the LMS, I do it there instead of introducing a whole other tool to bring in that students have to click away from or that students have to learn. I use my Office suite as much as I can. So I use Google tools for everything, as you can see. If I can do it in a Google tool, then I'm going to do that. I mentioned that I like Padlet because I can use it a lot of different ways. Padlet is one of the only tools that I actually pay for because I use it so much. Flipgrid, because video is so important. And then EdPuzzle for those interactive videos. That's pretty much it. It's very rarely that I'm introducing a new tool. I just use those and I use them a lot. And that is because even though our students are techie and learn tech really easily, they still don't necessarily know how to use it for their learning. And if I can simplify this process where I teach them how to use Padlet and I don't have to teach them again for the rest of the year, we're going to use that tool a lot, then I free up time where I don't have to teach kids how to use the technology and we can jump right into learning. Bill Ferreter, I went to a session of his last week, and he actually made a good point. He likes to think about simplicity in your online learning as creating simpler tasks, because students are going to often be independent and they won't have you there to walk through the task. But just because you create a simpler task does not mean that you have to simplify the cognitive complexity of that task. So he simplifies the action students have to take online while raising the cognitive complexity. So simplifying does not mean that students have to learn less too. We don't have to simplify learning. And I really liked the way that he framed that. Additionally, chunking information is really important. So thinking about breaking things up into smaller pieces. I think that's one of those design things that we do with good intentions that has a negative impact. We know, research tells us that our young adults can process about 3 to 5 things at any given time. So when we put everything on one page or we create a hyperdocument in a document instead of in slides, we're putting so much information in one spot that we're pretty much guaranteeing that our students can't process all of that information. And we do it with good intentions. We think there are fewer clicks, and so that's simple navigation. And if we have fewer clicks for our kids, then that's going to be better. And while simple navigation is key, it is almost always better to break things up into smaller pieces with clear navigation than to put everything together. George, great. I love that quote. Choose tools that are low floor and high ceiling. I love that. I love that. Additionally, when we look at our designs, the negative space on a screen is going to help with cognitive load. So negative space is just the empty space between objects. What we don't need to do is create digital lessons that fill the entire screen, where there's a piece of content in every section of the screen, because our eyes don't know where to look. And when we create negative space, that empty space, it guides your eyes to what's important. It also helps things stand out. It's easier to look at too. So negative space is your best friend. It's something that I struggle with, honestly. I want to fill every spot on a slide when I'm designing. And then I have a quote on my desk in my office that actually says, oh man, I really wish I was sitting at my desk right now so that I could get that quote perfectly. But essentially, let me paraphrase it. It's that you need to, actively remove as much as possible until you can't remove anything else and still get your point across. That's when you've reached the perfect design. So I have to actively get rid and aggressively get rid of digital content to just what I absolutely need for students to see. And then again, I've mentioned reflection over and over and over again, and that's because it's your best friend as an online lesson designer. It helps keep students actively engaged, which we talked about a lot. It gives you a chance to get a window into what they're thinking. Those metacognitive activities help you get quick data to make those instructional decisions in small group to help drive your synchronous time with students. But also it helps with cognitive load, because even if we chunk information and we put it in small pieces, that's still a lot of information if we don't break it up that students have to process. And so if we can pause several times in our digital lesson and ask students to think about their thinking, maybe it's write a 1-sentence summary of what they just watched. Maybe it's answering a question saying, what's the muddiest point right now? What's the thing that's you're struggling to understand? Those reflection activities help students stop and process the information, move it into long-term memory, and then move on to new material, freeing up cognitive load so that they can process new information. It also helps with academic integrity. If you have regular opportunities for students to reflect on their thinking, it's one thing to copy paste an essay you found online and call it your own. It's a whole other thing to copy paste an essay, call it your own, and then reflect on the writing process you took while writing it. I have a math teacher that in every single short quiz he gives, he's a calculus teacher, pre-calculus, trig, and calculus. He will have the 4 or 5 question quick check quiz, and he'll add a question. What was the most difficult task or difficult concept in this lesson? Because he knows that there are apps out there that will answer math problems for the kids. But it's a lot harder to think about your own process through a math question if you have not thought about it, if you've just copied something you found online. So reflection is your best friend. And I had a few other things, but I'm a talker, so I want to just skip to this slide. Thank you all so much. It's been so great to see your ideas. I hope you stay connected. That's my Twitter handle. If you are interested in my book, that's the link where you can get it. It's a little bit backordered right now, just because of the time, the challenges we're facing this year. But I do have a discount code for 20% off if you use that code, if you're interested. I'd mostly just love for you all to connect with me so that we can keep the learning going. And I don't know if there are any other questions. My EdTech in the Bin friends want to join me.
Fantastic presentation, Michelle. The one thing that was mentioned was that some of how can we adapt these ideas to fit like our really low readers or our kiddos that don't necessarily type well. Do you have any ideas on how we can adapt these ideas for them?
Absolutely. So speaking to my primary teacher heart, I think I'm actually in my district right now working with some teachers to develop our elementary online asynchronous lessons. So using audio and video as much as possible, that consistency of navigation is going to be even more critical. So simplifying, where students have one place to go, really using very clear icons. Icons are really helpful. If you want them to listen to something, use a little ear icon to listen next to the audio file. Using big arrows to indicate, where they're going to be clicking next. So making it super visual. I think our first instinct is always to do text first with everything. If we can shift that thinking and start with visual media, even if you are a teacher of high schoolers, if you are a college professor, it doesn't have to be just with our emerging readers, but if we think visual media first, we can get rid of some unnecessary text that students are likely to skim anyway, and we can create a really high quality lesson using multimedia. So the audio, the visual is your best friend, and I think even simplifying even more with our youngest kiddos, I'm not going to introduce a bunch of new tools, especially if those tools are taking them to a new tab. And I've seen something with our kindergarten teachers right now as they're designing remote lessons for our online learners. They had a really great idea. They're creating what they're coining Dora videos. So if you've ever watched those kids cartoon shows like Dora the Explorer, or I think back to my childhood and it was Blue's Clues, where they'll talk and then it's like they're addressing the kids sitting at home, and it'll be like, point to the circle, and then they'll pause and they'll be like, that's right, that's the circle. And they give them that immediate feedback. Well, our kindergarten teachers are creating their little mini lesson videos as Dora videos, where a parent might have to help them get that video started, but they can get that immediate feedback during the lesson in a format that the kids are probably used to already. And I thought that was really, really smart too. If you go to, ISTE has a website called, doing this on the fly, learningkeepsgoing.org. Yes, learningkeepsgoing.org. If you go there and you click on their webinars, one of the links there is for early learners. It'll take you to a whole collection of webinars and podcasts specifically designed for early childhood in remote settings. And so I think it's a great place to explore lots of different things about online learning. That's a whole full day workshop in and of itself, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. The only other question or comment that people had was your thoughts on Bitmoji classrooms from the design perspective.
Oh no, you guys are putting me on the spot. You realize there is a Twitter war right now about Bitmoji classrooms, and you're not going to let me be Switzerland on this, are you? Okay.
You can give a positive and a negative, and then you're Switzerland.
I have some conflicting feelings about the Bitmoji classroom. What I have seen, we are facing a challenging year, and a lot of us are scared. And creating those classrooms has helped a lot of teachers get excited about something. And I think creating something, especially for your students that are used to your physical classroom, that makes it feel like normal, I think is good. So I love that teachers are getting excited about it. And for a lot of teachers, this is the thing that they felt successful with technology. And maybe it's the first time they felt successful creating something with technology. And we have, and you feel like a designer. And I think that's great. I think they can be a little problematic, especially when we start using them for instruction. They have, a lot of them are not going to be accessible at all. So I think if you are reading my book, chapter 10 is all about accessibility, which you are legally required to follow. And the more digital content we put out there, the more we put ourselves at risk if we're not being accessible to get in trouble. And I don't want to like take a fear tactic there, but because it's also what's best for kids. Having accessible content that all of our learners can engage with, and not just even the majority, is important. So I think there's some accessibility considerations that need to be addressed with Bitmoji Classroom. I also think they may not be as easy to navigate for all of our learners to know exactly where to go, that putting things in a sequential order, especially if we're talking about students that are starting remote, where we have to create a lot of structure to help them be successful. they could be problematic. So I'm trying to, so I think design away, but think about cognitive load, think about negative space, think about accessibility, and if you're gonna do it, keep those things in mind.
Thank you so much. That was perfect answer. Great.
Okay. I really don't want to engage in the Twitter war, so please don't come at me with pitchforks on Twitter.
We would like to again thank Michele for her presentation and all of you for attending. As a reminder, all of these sessions are recorded and will be left on YouTube and Facebook for the next couple of weeks. We at EdTech in the Bend hope you enjoy the rest of your day. The next session is Kyle Klein talking about math smashing, another fantastic Indiana educator. And go get Michele's book because I tried and it was sold out. So like I'm shutting this down and purchasing it because I'm so excited for it. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.